Welcome back to Uncover Your Magic. I'm getting ready for this interview on my daughter's 15th birthday. To think 15 years ago, I was awaiting her arrival, unknown of the gifts she was bringing me, or the or really knowing what a mother was going to experience and the miracle of having a baby. The day our children are born are moments we all cherish and remember as blessings from God. The interesting thing is, there is no parenting class to take before we all become parents. We just do our best and mostly do what our parents did. When I look back at how I showed up as a parent for my girls, I feel grateful I did a lot of personal development work before they were born, that I really feel that I felt prepared with the mindset tools and the importance of how much programming is done by the time they are 7 years old. It's crazy to think they are 80% programmed by such a young age. If everyone knew that or could have an awareness as they are programming their children, life on the other side of the 80% wouldn't be as much of a struggle. What I mean by that is the self limiting beliefs we have as humans are only roadblocks we are unaware of and are keeping us from living a magical life. So now that I have 15 years of parenting in the books, I can say I have witnessed watching my two girls being programmed by Richard and I and their surroundings. And I feel blessed and full of gratitude that we had that awareness. Not to say there were those moments I wish I could erase, but for the most part, I can look back and say we did a pretty darn good job. I truly believe there are tools that kids need with these tools, they can build internal muscles and a mindset that will set them up for success in every area of life and give them the confidence to show up in their life and have the knowing that they can be, do, or have anything. So now, after saying all that, I want to tell you about my Raising Confidence course that I'm so proud of, that I created, that teaches these kids the principles that I believe in are so important in life. And it's during an 8-week course, one on one with me, all personal. And I teach them this formula that includes a morning routine, positive affirmations, a gratitude practice, setting big goals, and taking action each day. They learn their core values and really how important it is to have that awareness and so much more. The transformation I have witnessed this past year with my students has been magical. They come hungry and soak up every tool like a sponge. I get calls from parents that say the entire energy has shifted in their house because of their child learning these powerful yet very simple techniques. Can you imagine the confidence these kids will have after these 8 weeks with me to go out into the world, take massive inspired action, be a difference maker in others, and live with intention, knowing they can be, do, or have anything? I want to give you an example of my daughter, Paige, the one that just turned 15. She discovered rowing, the crew team at high school. She just is a freshman. She discovered it over quarantine because theater and softball and all the activities she was used to doing were shut down. And she thought she would give it a try. She's she is now as a freshman rowing in a varsity boat at nationals and has a goal to be in the Olympics and win a gold medal. Now, that is what I mean by teaching kids that there is no risk too big. And when you try something new and taking a risk, you may find out that you love it. To see her in this new sport so focused and so determined and realizes the mindset it takes to accomplish something so foreign at the time, and now sees herself at the Olympics with a gold medal around her neck. I've had other kids who had goals, but then we added on bigger ideas to the goals, and they realized, wow, I would have never thought I could dream that big and would have never known if I didn't try or have the confidence to try. So if you are interested in learning more about this course, please email me at ashleygoner@gmail.com. I will also have a link in the show notes for you to click on to sign up for more information. All I can say is I am so passionate about helping these kids, especially in times that we are living in today. I really believe if I had these tools at their age, my life could have so much more clarity. My life would have had so much more clarity, and I would have been so much more confident in the direction I was going. I really feel this should be part of their education because it's that important. Now, on to my guest today, Abby Havermann. Oh my gosh, I met Abby Havermann through our mutual friend, Ellie Molina. You might recognize that name. She's been on this show twice before, and she was also a guest speaker in my group. But Ellie thought that Abby and I would be a great match, and she wanted to connect us. We both have the intention to help and inspire kids and to teach them mindset tools so they can live a more confident and empowered life. But then I started to learn more about Abby, as I love doing my research before we have these incredible conversations. And wow, are you in for a treat? Her story will blow your mind, and her knowledge on our minds and the neuroscience and how we create our own reality is so intriguing. We are going to learn so much today. Before I get started with my sweet Abby, my new friend, I want to give you a little bit background on her. So, Abby Havermann is a dynamic coach, speaker, writer, and trainer dedicated to facilitating sustainable, transformational change. A former private practice psychotherapist, Abby uses leading edge neuroscience to teach people how to rewire their thoughts, adapt, and transcend prior limitations to achieve great heights. She weaves warmth, wit, and authenticity in her top tier coaching and trainings, resulting in exceptional outcomes for individuals and organizations. Abby is a best-selling contributor to The Beauty of Authenticity, featured in Letters to Me, a contributor to Kiplinger magazine, and is currently working on her memoir. So without further ado, please welcome Abby Havermann to the show.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm so excited to be here. I love what you do. I think you're doing such great work.
Oh, thank you. And as I said in the intro before I had you on, we have that mutual friend, Ellie Molina, who brought us together. And I was listening to her podcast with you on it as I do my research and learned so much about you, which I cannot wait to get into. But, I think when I think of her saying, Ashley, you need to meet Abby, and I'm thinking, I wonder why, there's always something. And she's so, such a neat person.
Yeah.
I think, and I looked at, teaching children, how, you have two boys and, I'm doing this, I have my two girls and raising them with the utmost awareness as I possibly can as an older parent to, empower them with tools that I didn't have growing up or even in my 20s, and being lost and having no direction. And, and I think, gosh, here I have met Ellie. She connects me to you. And now I've gone down this whole other Abbey road, the Abbey road, that I just can't wait to get into and share with my listeners, because it's a beautiful story. So inspiring. We all go through, it's like, everyone has their story, but we all can relate to for sure. I mean, I would say most of it, like when you're a woman, especially with your story, I feel. So, take me where you want to begin, and then we'll just kind of go from there.
Sure. Well, I guess, I have this passion about working with women around what I believe, as I said on Ellie's podcast as well, is that we are really suffering from this historical, societal, and self-perpetuated unconscious sense of unworthiness. Mm-hmm. And that causes us to separate from our intuition quite a bit. And so that ends up being what brings a lot of the things into our lives that we're not desiring. And that's kind of what I write about, what women end up, they don't realize they're coming to me for that. But a lot of times that's really where we end up when we try and figure out, well, okay, you've created this, incredible life. You're very successful. You've got all these things in place, and yet you don't feel on the inside the way that everybody looks at you on the outside. And it turns out that all of these behaviors that got you to this great success are not the ones that are going to get you out of burnout and to where you really want to be in the life that you want to have.
So when you connect intuition with where does intuition come from? So they're not listening to their intuition. they're going down this path, like, going, not listening, not listening. I always, I'm so into right now at 52 years old, so focused on, listening to my intuition,
Yeah.
and we all have that. And it's just such an awareness to have, but explain what you mean by that. Like, why do you see that that is the reason that they're not, that they feel unworthy or they're unworthy programming?
I think that the unworthy programming, all of the things that we are taught, that we need to think of other people first, that we should stay small, that we should not step on people's toes. Sometimes I liken it to the Red Riding Hood story, where she knew that the wolf's eyes and ears and teeth were too big. She knew, right? But
Right.
she didn't put the basket down and run out of the cottage. No, she took a step closer and a step closer and a step closer until the wolf ate her. And so I always like to think about, well, why didn't she leave? Why did she keep
Mm-hmm.
taking a step closer? And it could have been any number of reasons. She didn't want to be disrespectful. She doubted herself. The wolf said it was the granny, said it was fine, so she should defer. She didn't want to be too know-it-all-y. She wanted to be nice. The person wasn't feeling well. All of these reasons that I think we as women talk ourselves out of this feeling that is inside of us sometimes, that if we stopped and got quiet and paid attention to it, we would say, oh, something doesn't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
And if we felt worthy, I believe, we would actually stop long enough to say, if this doesn't feel right, I need to listen to that
Right.
instead of what this other person wants, needs, or feels, or what I need in order for me to feel good. In other words, I don't want to feel guilty, so I'll do this thing that I don't really want to do.
Right. So
Yeah.
I look at it like in my life, all the relationships that I just go, oh, I guess I'll, this is what I'm doing. I signed up for, you know, well, okay, here we go. Not listening to that intuition where I know in my heart this is not right, get out. But it's the unworthiness that keeps you stuck because you're not
I
worthy
believe
of
so.
more, right?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yep. I believe so. And you never could have told me that was the case at the time. At the time, I was a practicing psychotherapist. I had a thriving practice. I was teaching at the adjunct faculty at the Graduate School of Social Work. I really externally did not look unworthy, and I wouldn't have liked that title. I would have, no, that's not
Right.
me, you know. And it wasn't until some really hardships that I realized, well, if I'm not unworthy, then why would I be doing these things? Why
Right.
why would I not be putting myself first unless I believed, women like to hide behind, well, it's the right thing to do. Well, the right thing to do is what's right for you. And I think what really women fail to understand is that when we do what's right for us, we are doing what's right for everyone else, even if that means that people are temporarily upset with us
Right.
or we
Oh.
don't garner their appreciation or attention in that moment.
So empowering. And I know everyone who's listening that I'm so close to listen. It is so empowering to know that, because when you start to know that, your whole entire everything changes. Oh my gosh, everything. Okay, so I want people to understand what got you from, oh my gosh, Abby, you are so acting unworthy. You're not listening to your intuition. What was that breaking moment where the light bulb went off?
All right. Well, the the breaking moment, as I don't know, sometimes is the case, but as these bone crushing, humiliating moments in my life is when I really seem to wake up. And I, at the time, was a practicing psychotherapist, and my husband was a addictions counselor who had relapsed on pain medication. And I was about to leave him. And at the time, he knew I was leaving him. And so there was one morning where he was particularly out of it and he shoved me and I slapped him. And he then called 911. And what I didn't know is that when the police come to your house for a domestic violence call, at least in Colorado, uh, they are mandated to arrest someone. And I did what I did at that time, right? I overfunctioned. I took on more responsibility that was mine. I protected him. I worried about what the neighbors were seeing. I, tried to, make sure my son was going to be okay and that everybody was going to be home. And what happened was that they arrested me,
Mm.
and I had to spend a night in jail. And so during that night in jail, I had this epiphany, and this is really what my book is about, that I came to see all the times that I had betrayed myself leading up to that moment, which included marrying someone I didn't really love.
Hmm.
And I had this come to Jesus moment where I realized that the reason I had broken my own laws so much, that I always focused on everyone else, what they wanted and needed and thought, was because I believed at this unconscious level that I was unworthy, that I was unlovable. It came to me as a voice, like literally on the floor of a jail cell. I was asking myself, how could I have married someone I wasn't really that into? How did I forget all of these things that were actually thoughts on my very wedding day? And then
Wow.
this voice came to me and it said, well, who else was going to love you? And I just sat up in my cot and I was like, oh my God,
Huh.
that's what's happening. And I saw all the places where I had betrayed myself at every turn. And in this case, not only did I end up betraying myself and my ex-husband for that matter, who didn't need to marry someone who wasn't in love with him,
Right.
but my son in that moment, he had to spend the night with my husband who was on drugs.
Oh,
So it was really the epitome of betraying yourself and betraying everyone around you. And it was
oh,
serious. And I had to really look at myself really hard and say, you know what? All this thing that I think I'm doing is right. I'm being the good girl. I'm being thoughtful. I'm being selfless. I'm deferring all over the place, over functioning. Those are breaking my own laws. I went to jail because I broke my own laws.
right.
That's why
Gosh.
that happened.
And it took you to go to jail to have those.
Yes, the police had to
Gosh.
intervene for me to stop doing what was bad for me. I had to
Wow.
have the police arrest me to wake me up to this is not right. You're not
Man.
behaving right.
Okay. So you get out of jail, you go home, and you have this new epiphany. And now what? You're on a mission to get out of there?
Yeah, so I was already scheduled to leave him. In fact, I was going to leave him the following day. So I went home and I moved out and I brought my son. I had a place to move to and really from things from there really got worse and worse and I became to see how in denial I had been of his addiction and how I had been deferring and questioning myself. Throughout this whole marriage it was like, well, I think you're on too many meds. No, I'm not on too many meds. You're hysterical. You're all the things that go along with an addictive marriage. And because I grew up in the way that I grew up and doubting myself as women just generally do, and I realized I didn't need to argue all these years about this. I didn't need his agreement that his
Hmm.
behavior was bizarre or whatnot. All I needed to do was plug into my intuition and just say, you know what, maybe you're right. I don't know, but it's not working for me.
Right.
It's not working for me. And so I have to do what's right for me. And instead, what would happen is I went on what I call like the anger shame cycle that so many of us go through when we're living with addicts, which is, we get so angry at what's happening. And then that anger almost always is followed by a shame cycle because when we're that angry, we behave poorly.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, we feel so ashamed of our own behavior that we forget what caused us to be angry in the first place.
Right.
And all of a sudden, it's like, well, maybe I was crazy. Maybe I am just reacting to my childhood. Maybe.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
I
I
used
call
to
it a
get stuck
cycle.
there.
I call it a cycle because
Yeah.
I've gone now, gosh, you're so much like you're clearing my what I went through. Now I'm like, oh my gosh, Ashley, been having light bulb moments the last 10 minutes. But I used to call it a cycle. So I would do the same thing. Any kind of relationship, I'd be like, oh, I would be torn down, right? Torn down, torn down. I'd be like, okay, okay. And then you'd go, and then he'd say something or, oh, you maybe better. Then you go, okay, oh, better, I'm better. And then it'd go shoot, 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 right? And then it would
Right.
be where you'd start going, oh, maybe I am wrong. And I'd start questioning myself. And then all of a sudden I'm doing this cycle. Is that?
Exactly. I call it the anger shame cycle. And this feeds into like one of my favorite topics, which is the reason that we get on that we stay on that cycle is also because we have a very screwed up idea of what self-care is.
Mm,
And so what makes that worse is that then we do what everybody tells us is self-care. We go and get the bubble bath and we get the massage and we have a glass of wine with the girls and we think, okay, I am good. I've done everything. I was very selfish. I took all this time for myself. And now I should be okay.
right,
And you go home and you lose your mind again as soon as he's on drugs or the kids are up too late or whatever it is, that's the dishes are in the sink, whatever it is.
right.
And then you get to beat yourself up because you spent all this money and took all this time and you're still a bitch.
Right. Totally.
Right. And so, and the problem is that self care has nothing to do with those things. Self care actually has to do with saying no when you need to say no. Self care has to do with listening to your intuition, saying this isn't working for me. Self care has to do with risking someone being upset with you or not appreciating you or not liking you because you had to do what you needed to do for yourself.
Oh, I
So,
just had, yes, going where I am in my life right now, great marriage. I didn't get married till I was 36, had children later in life, but, I've done all the work ahead of time to like prepare my life to get to know the right guy. I did I tell the girls all the time, you don't know who you are in your 20s. You got to do a lot of stuff.
amen.
You got to search and learn and grow. And, the same person you maybe think you are is completely different in with a 3 in the front of it. Right. So
Exactly.
I always say, when you get to that place where you like, I got it, where you get that feeling of, I am listening to my intuition. I know I'm worth that.
Yep.
I want to do that. That's what I'm trying to do with my girls because I want to
So,
save that. Right.
so
That's where my,
unbelievable. Yeah.
that
So
is
I
such a
mean,
passion because of
it's
that.
so fantastic and it's so important. And I have a son in high school, just getting out of high school, but I see, girls that just, they don't have that even now. They
Mm,
don't have that sense. And it's so important. I didn't have that till after I left my husband. And it was and I always say that I created him. I literally, I brought him to me and I didn't know I was doing it at the time. I didn't know then what I know now, but what I was doing was I couldn't sleep at night. And it's funny, I think I heard one of your guests telling a similar story, and I'm like, yep, that's exactly how it happens. I couldn't sleep at night because I was so stressed out. And my ex got much, much worse after that. He devolved into heroin use and he had a
oh,
very bad
wow.
accident and had 5 strokes. I mean, it got really, real. It was Jerry Springer ugly.
Wow.
And so I was a wreck. I was a walking nerve ending. And I had a 3-year old who would get up at 4 in the morning, like just as I was falling asleep. And I got so bad that I went, to a psychiatrist to try and get something to sleep, but I didn't want to use it. And
Hmm.
somewhere along the way, I figured out that if I got into bed and I closed my eyes and I just pictured in vivid color the life that I wanted for him and for me. And that included a man. And I knew exactly what that man who was going to be like because I knew exactly what I didn't want him to be like. He was
Yep.
going to, he was going to work for a living. He was going to, he was in a suit, he had a home. He was very affectionate because my ex wasn't. He came up with parenting ideas with me. He was a
Oh,
partner. He loved to hike. All these things, right? And for the first time in my life, I knew with every cell in my body that I was worthy of that was going to happen, that I had a lot of love to give. And that, unlike my brother joked on both of my wedding nights to my husband's sucker,
oh
you
my
know,
gosh.
unlike that, I
Wow.
knew that whoever this was going to be so lucky to have me. And that's what made me feel so safe and let my body calm down enough that I could fall asleep every night. And so
Oh,
that's why I did it. But 30 days later, my husband showed up, my
oh,
new
I
husband.
love that. So you would lay there and just revel in that feeling. It's the
Yeah.
feeling of what it felt like to be in that relationship.
Yeah. To be that worthy and that loved and know, just know that I was worthy of that.
Right.
It wasn't a hope. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't like, oh, I hope this happens. Or maybe it was like, no, damn right, this is going to happen because
Yes. I
nobody
love it.
deserves what I've been through. And if nobody deserves what I've been through, that means I don't deserve what I've been through. And if I don't deserve what I've been through, that means I must be worthy.
Yes. Oh, I love that. So empowering, so much. So you 30 days later, how did you meet him?
I met him online, actually.
Oh, fun.
I had 3 people in 1 week told me, you should try eHarmony. And, I had been a private practice psychotherapist at the time. And so and at the time that was very taboo, but I had been working with a lot of single women who had been doing that. And so we would work through the stigma and all that kind of stuff. So by the time people said that to me, I was like, all right, I've got a 3-year-old. And there's not a stigma now, but then there was.
Right.
But at the time I was like, I'm not going to be hanging out at bars. I don't care.
Right.
So that's how we
Oh,
met.
I love that.
He
So
was the
then
first
you,
person I met.
I love it. See,
Yeah.
and those things, Richard and I met on, through It's Just Lunch. but it's where you pay the money and you get so many dates. So, and I wasn't going to do the bar thing either. I was busy. I had a business and everything, but I already did the same thing. I did the work. I visualized. I had a Hallmark card in my thing for 5 years, and he brought me the Hallmark card, exactly
Oh
the
my
same
God.
one. I read it. I go, oh my gosh, I've been reading this for 5 years, and here he is. He's my soulmate.
Oh my
So
God.
along with that, it was like there was so many like moments of synchronicities and all those things. But when you do that work and you feel it and you see it and you deserve it, and everyone is worthy of that, and that worthiness that I want so bad for my girls to feel, like raising girls especially, just because that whole feeling of being the little girl that needs I don't want that. I want this empowerment, the strength.
Exactly.
So now with this husband you met, you're still married to him.
Yeah. Yep. We've been together 15 years.
Okay. So you have a son with him as well.
I do. I have a 10-year-old with him. Yeah.
Okay. So now you go to meeting him. You have your son, he's born. And I want to explain that when I was telling you before we hit record, the thing where you bought your that coaching program and it was expensive, and where you found out your son had something going on.
Yeah. Yeah. So my husband and I had, we had bought like a coaching program that I was very excited about. It was learning how to speak on stage with a former NFL player and Broadway playwright and actor. And I was so excited. And we purchased it, I think, in May, but it started in August. And during that time, I had two family members diagnosed with cancer. I had my sister in law drop dead suddenly of a heart disease that my husband actually had a diagnosis of, and
Oh
she
my
died at
gosh.
54.
Oh,
And my 7-year-old at the time was diagnosed with a neuromuscular disorder. And this all happened between May and August
oh
when I
my
was set to
gosh.
go. And I drugged myself. I mean, I spent 6 weeks in bed just with the phone and a box of tissues and the TV remote. And I was talking to doctors, and I just was like, I'm out. Like, I'm out. And we were waiting for diagnoses and all this kind of stuff. But I drugged myself on the plane because it was exorbitantly expensive. And I was excited about it. And we got there. And what happened was, is I was in a room with these really high achieving people, right? We always compare ourselves to others. And there
Mm-hmm.
was a woman who had treated the highest paying actress in America the week before. And there was a guy who had toured with Tony Robbins. And there were people in the financial industry like we were that had, much more money than I thought that we did. And all this stuff, right? And I just showed up because, when you have that much tragedy, it hits you, at like a cellular level. So
Mm-hmm.
even if I were feeling great, I was kind of propped up like a house of cards. I just
Right.
was not feeling my best. And I was aware of it. And so every interaction I had, I was aware of that. Oh, that, because there was other coaches there too that were helping him. Oh, she's paying more attention to the other people, all this kind of stuff. And I thought, well, you know what? The one thing I know how to do is pay attention to what I'm thinking. So that's what I'm going to do. And so I started to write out all of my thoughts that morning. I wasn't even listening to what he was saying. All I was doing was, oh, redhead in the corner. She's gorgeous. She's got a beautiful body. She's a doctor. She wasn't even a doctor. I like made that up in my head, right? He's going to like so-and-so better, all these people, yada, yada. And we had these 5-minute talks that we had to give and that he was going to coach us on. And by noon that day, I was really tired of this voice in my head that was saying that I was so much less than everybody else. And it allowed me to pay attention. And so people would get up and they would give their 5-minute speeches that we've been rehearsing, their stories. And my story that I gave was the one of going to jail.
Huh.
So it's very vulnerable. And as I was watching everybody, I thought, oh God, they're going to just kill it. They're going to make so much of this. They're going to just go out in the world and do so great. Now I'm not, because I'm broken. And by the time this is over, I'm just going to crawl back into my bed. But they're going to do great. And the next day came and it was time for me to do my 5-minute thing. And I gave my thing, and it ended with, that I was unlovable, that I believed I was unlovable. And this coach sat back in his chair and he goes, huh. And he looked around the room and he said, now, would any of you think that Abby was going to say that? like that this happened to her and that she thought she was unlovable. And I looked around the room at everybody's eyes and they all were like nodding no, they didn't. And in
Hmm.
this really this moment that I'm always like this, kind of moment,
Right.
I suddenly like was catapulted into their bodies and I saw myself through their eyes the way that they saw me, which was exactly the way that I had seen them, which is, wow, this
Mm,
woman's amazing. She's going to go out there and kill it.
right.
And in that moment, I realized, good God, if I can't get beyond myself, if I can't get out of this place, how am I going to tell my 7-year-old that he's got to keep going?
Right.
He's got a lot to give this world, and he's got far more mountains to climb than I do potentially. So if I can't do this, who am I to say you've got to pick yourself up every day and keep moving?
Right. So he's 18 now.
No, no, he's 10.
Oh,
My
so the
18-year-old
little
from the other
one.
marriage. Yeah,
Okay, got
he's
it.
10. Mhm.
So he's the one that got diagnosed.
He got diagnosed with something called Charcot's-Marie tooth, which no one knows what it is, but it's actually more common than MS.
Oh,
One in
wow.
2,500 people have it. Yeah. And he got diagnosed young. He has CMT2 is what's 2A is what it's called. It's a genetic, but I was pregnant with him during a time that I was finding out he was had heroin, finding out about my husband's heart diagnosis. I had to go back for full custody for the older one. I mean, there was a lot of stress during that pregnancy. So even though it's genetic, neither my husband or I have it. It was just like spontaneous in him.
Ah, got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then you started going down trying to research, like getting into neuroscience. That's what I love to learn about you because I love that. I always listen to Dr. Joe Dispenza. I read all his books and I have gotten so into learning just how much our mind can do. It's
Yes.
always, I was raised with my mom's side of the family, mind over matter. Everything was, mind over matter. We never said, I raised the girls that way. We don't talk anyway. We always talk with health and, we might not feel good, but we talk about what does feel good. It's a very high vibe, house where we don't say, it's just, if we do, we're like, Mom, you're in trouble, you
Yeah.
know. But so tell me so you just started, so seeing this, having your child be diagnosed with something so rare, or not rare, but something that you weren't expecting and something I've never heard of, and then what, as a mom, like, where do you go? You're,
Yeah. So, I mean, thank God that around that time is when I really started learning about neuroscience and started doing all that stuff. I was just thinking about this morning, actually, because there is no way that my husband and I would be walking through what we're walking through now in the way that we're walking through it without the knowledge that I learned. There's just absolutely no way. And, I share often with people that people will say to me, like, oh, I'm so sorry. And this is so awful. And I don't, I'm kind of like, are you talking to me? I mean,
oh,
I
oh,
don't,
I love
I
that.
don't feel that way. Right. Like,
Right.
because I have a different belief system around it. So I just coincidentally, the timing came on, not long after Jaden was diagnosed. When he was first diagnosed, I just went into that where I would have gone, which is just like I said, in bed, and oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. And my mind went to, is he going to be able to drive? Is he going to be in a wheelchair? All these things, right?
Yeah.
And then I really learned so much more that your and this is some of what I've learned from Dr. Joe Dispenza, as you've talked about, and it's in his books and whatnot, but that your your personality creates your personal reality. And
Mm-hmm.
your personality is made up of how you think and how you act and how you feel. So if I want to think those things, then I'm going to act a certain way. I'm going to get in bed and I'm not going to get out, you know?
Right.
And then I'm going to feel really hopeless and I'm going to feel self pitying and I'm going to feel like a victim and I'm going to, and then so is my son, right?
Yep.
But if I want to change that thought to something like, I pick different thoughts, but, my thought now around this is, look, I don't know why this happened. I don't know why his soul chose to come down here and what lesson he was trying to learn, what contract he signed before he flew down to Earth about what he wanted to learn. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what I signed before I came down here about what I need to learn and why this happened, but it is what it is. And so I believe that we determine those things before
Mm-hmm.
we get here.
Right.
And so then that flips it on its head. Then how, if I think that, then how am I going to act? I'm going to act like more curious than
Right.
anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely going to be up and out of bed, and I'm going to feel more hope and more resolved and more at peace with whatever is.
Right.
And what it causes me to be able to do is be able to see really so much of the beauty in my son. He's got he's an amazing artist. He's a really creative kid. He's really all these things. Like, your kids are lucky you did this from the beginning, but my oldest, my 18-year-old, I didn't do this from the beginning. I was still walking around in shame and unworthiness, and, oh, don't say that and don't do that, and don't make us look this way, and and all this stuff. So he's
Mm-hmm.
having to learn all this stuff along with me.
Right.
But the younger one, it allows me to, when I watch him walk across a room, not just get into huge fear and terror and walk with your feet straight, and and all that stuff, that we do when we're in fight or flight.
Right. So when you learn the personality, I love that because it is that. And when you change just the thoughts alone, you can change your whole reality. It's like I
Yeah.
always teach, like, whatever thoughts you think, whatever words you speak, there you go. Here you are. But explain to, because when I did your master class a month ago or so, it was so interesting. Kind of go a little bit there because I was interested in the stress. When you have that stress, the hormones, the chemicals that attack your adrenal glands. I mean, we don't need to go too sciencey, but you didn't, because I loved it and I understood it. But will you explain that part, and what's your drive even to have that, teach that?
Right. Well, so first, it's nothing that I've written or that I, created myself. This is just the science behind, how we work in our bodies. And so, are you referring to how we get addicted to our emotions?
Yes.
Okay. So, what happens, and I was just talking to a client earlier about this today, but what happens is that when you have a thought, it's a neuron firing. And what happens once that neuron fires, it sends a message down to your limbic brain. And your limbic brain is responsible. It's also known as your emotional brain or your chemical brain. And it sends a corresponding chemical down into your body. So now you're feeling the way that you're thinking. And we get in what's called a thinking and feeling feedback loop. And this is stuff I've learned from Dr. Joe's books and other places as well. A lot of people talk about it. And what happens, for example, let's say you're angry, that chemical goes down into your body. Anger, it hits your adrenal glands, and your adrenal glands put a burst of energy into your body. And our bodies get addicted to that burst of adrenaline. And people say, well, I had clients say to me all the time, I don't want to feel judgmental. I don't want to feel critical. No, I'm not addicted to that. I don't want to feel that way. Well, yeah, I understand. We don't want to, but our bodies get addicted to feeling that way. And so when that happens, then we get addicted to the things and people and places that cause us to feel that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, like, I've heard Dr. Joe say that, what will happen is, like, you might get out of a situation where maybe you quit a job because your boss is irritating you. But before you know it, you find someone else in your life to be really irritating. And people always say to me, even when I was doing couples therapy and stuff, people would say, but I saw him from across the bar. I didn't know that he was an asshole. Like, I didn't know
Right.
he was a narcissist. I didn't. And I'd say, yeah, but you had that energetic thing going. You are looking for that. Your body is addicted to the feeling that these kinds of people bring in your life. And so
Huh.
you drew that person to you, right? Just like when I finally became worthy, I drew someone to
Right.
me that was different.
Right. Oh, I love that. So strong. That, when I think of how just even as a child growing up, like all the kids that have these dads that, you just don't know. Did you have a childhood that was strong? Did you have a mom that was worthy? Did you have the role models in your
Me,
life? Yes.
no. My mom was very strong in terms of, she never went to college, and she ended up building herself up to being the president of a company with a board of directors of white British men. Like, she really was very successful externally, but she did not feel that way internally. And she would tell you that herself. Like, she had no self-worth at
Hmm.
all. Yeah.
And your
So
dad was a strong figure in your life too?
my dad's just a strong figure in general. He's just, but he marched to his own tune. My dad suffered with alcoholism for my whole childhood. He quit when I was 23. Um, but it was a very dysfunctional relationship. They divorced when I was 7. And, I learned a lot of tremendous lessons from both of them, really a lot. But I wouldn't say that self worth was one of them.
Hmm. And do you think your being around your father who was addicted, the personality, was that what kind of drew you to your husband, your ex-husband?
Um, Possibly. Yeah, possibly. I had this real idea that I just wanted to do everything differently. I wanted to show them, that I wasn't going to do this to my kids. I was going to do it all right, and that's really what got me in more trouble than anything else, because I became really unconscious to what I was doing. And I became more obsessed with what it looked like was happening as opposed to what was really happening. So there was a lot of anxiety when my family would come visit because I wanted everything to look just right. And really, everything was kind of falling apart. And I wasn't able to acknowledge that. So I don't know that that's what drew me. I think maybe it was just more the emotional unavailability in general. I was just drawn to that. I was always drawn to that because I used to think that if my dad loved me, he would stop drinking. And I
Hmm.
remember saying that to him, and he didn't. And so I stopped talking to him for like a year and a half. And I didn't understand until so many years later that it had nothing to do with how much he loved me. It's a disease, like it's completely separate, right?
Right.
But I didn't understand that, but I was still operating on that principle. So to me, when I went out looking for men in the world, it was, if I can get that one to love me, then I'm worthy. Because I didn't feel that in myself. So I chose these guys who were really emotionally unavailable in one way or another,
Hmm.
and said, if I can close that deal, well,
Right.
then I'm lovable. It's like the exact opposite thing you want your girls to know.
Right.
It's the opposite way of going out into the world. It had nothing to do with anything other than trying to feel worthy. It's
Oh,
such a bad way to look for a husband.
such a bad way. And I know
Such a
that.
bad way.
And I know I was that way too. I mean, I was telling you the first 10 minutes, I'm like, oh my gosh, the first, whatever, when I'm 20 to 30 years old, those days where you're like, oh my gosh, Ashley, that's probably why I have such a drive for this for my kids, that I want that for them so bad. But when you were on Ellie's podcast and I was listening to you, and there was parents that called in about like the cell phones, and like I want to kind of go on your idea of parenting, and because you gave such great advice, and I'm such a big, obviously, proponent of teaching children and parenting correctly. What are your like top parenting tips that you would give?
Wow. As much as I try and as much as I want, to be that great parent, I don't know that I achieve those heights all the time. I have got a lot of great ideas, but I think it would be silly to say that in practice it's not so much harder than it is in philosophy. And I say that because I really think that so many women beat themselves up about the way that they parent. And there's things that they don't want anybody to know. We don't want people to know that we just lost our mind, and
Right.
screamed at our kid for 20 minutes, right? Like, we don't want anybody to know that. But what everybody needs to know is that we're all doing that. It's
Right.
like, because we're
Right.
human, right?
Right.
And it doesn't mean that we can't correct it and we don't go back and try and do it differently, but we all do it. And particularly people that are just in the thick of it, and just they're working and they're raising kids and they're doing all this stuff, and they don't have time to think about the right way to do something or whatever. They're doing it over and over again, and then they're hating themselves. And so I guess I just want to say that because it's just so important to know that we're all human. We're all struggle with this stuff. And
Right.
I think one of the biggest things that I've learned, particularly with just learning all this stuff about neuroscience and stuff, is that with my oldest, I was always very rigid around schoolwork, and you have to do this and you have to do that, and all this stuff. I remember sending him to school when he was really sick, at like 5 years old to kindergarten. And I remember the teacher saying to me, you could keep him home, and I was like, really? Well, I just wanted to, I didn't know, and now it's like half the time if my 10-year-old doesn't want to go to school, I mean, I don't let him just not go to school for the hell of it, but it's kind of like, all right, if you want to sit and draw all day, and really like letting them lead who they want to be. And the difference has been so profound. My older one wouldn't go anywhere without a friend. He wouldn't go to overnight camp without a friend. He wouldn't do a program without a friend. My younger one, so if I wanted to do something, I had to just find a friend who would do it.
Oh, funny.
Even a bar mitzvah, I had to find a friend who would do it. My younger one is like, he doesn't care if anybody's there. He's like, are there going to be horses? All right, I'll do it. Are there going to
Oh,
be, is it, this, I'll do it. It's all based on sort of much more of an internal sense of what he wants. I would say the other thing that I think we've had is a huge challenge, and I personally feel like my generation, or which is your generation, has had the hardest time with electronics, because they came out when our kids were coming of age at the same time, and we really didn't have any idea what the consequences would be of that.
right.
So one of the things that was really important to me, and I think I might have shared this on Ellie's too, is that when my older one would like get on video games, and I would get really, really worked up about it, because it would scare me. I felt like, my God, is he ever going to get out of there and do anything? And I
Right.
would go back to my own childhood of, addiction and all this kind of stuff. And I'd be like, he's going to be in a box under a bridge, and I would get myself all worked up. Right.
Hmm.
And then that caused me to be like, I would just run down to the basement, like, get out those things, and then I would set impulsive boundaries around it. That's it, it's done. And then he would eventually talk me out of it, because of course I had overreacted. And so I would doubt myself. And so before I knew it, we would come up with another plan, and that plan would turn into a slippery slope. And within a week, we were right back to where we started, and I would be enraged, and it would happen all over again. It was just like this cycle.
Yep.
And so one of the most important things that I really learned was, once again, it goes back to that intuition. Like, why don't I want my son to do this? What is most important about that to me? And getting really honest about my motives. Because if it's external, if I said to him, well, it's not good for you, then he would say, it's great for me. My coach said it gives me hand-eye coordination. Oh, you're the only parent that says this. And then I would doubt myself, right? And be like, oh,
Right.
me, Ma? But if I came from a place of like, why? It's because I feel like a crappy mom if I allow this. It's a fundamental value for me. And I don't want to feel like a crappy mom. That's a law. That's a personal law that has to go with my intuition. It comes from here. It doesn't come
Hmm.
from what my mother's going to think if she finds out how much video games my son plays. It doesn't come from, what other parents think or anything else, or who he may turn out to be as a result. It comes from what I need. And
Right.
so when I laid the law down that way and said, look, these are the rules. And, well, those are ridiculous. And you're the only mom, blah, blah. I'm like, well, I didn't buy into all that, because it was like, well, you may be right. I don't know. You may be right. But unfortunately for you, I have to do this for me. And I have a right to do that for me, because I need to do what's going to keep me in a good, emotionally sound place. So really, my biggest thing that I love to talk about parenting and about anything really, and I wrote a blog called this, is the only emergency is your serenity. It's really the only emergency. So if you can get yourself to a place of calm, and what are the things when you are even, because there's a saying, right? If mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. There's a reason
Hmm.
there that's true,
Right.
right? so
Yeah. Very.
so we have to really get close to what it is that our needs are. And when we are functioning from that place, the answers come. We know how to parent when that comes. We know what's right and what's wrong for our kids in that moment. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Totally. But when you say calm, because I had a conversation with my friend the other day, she's like, Ashley, oh, you can stay calm. I just go in these rages. And why do I get so mad? And I get these triggers, and I take their phones away, and I go all the whole thing, just like we just talked about.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I feel like of course I've done that. I'm not saying, believe me, there's many things I want to erase, but we are human.
Right.
And yes, the phone thing is just something that just I just don't like it. And I think it's the same thing. And I look at it like, it's a takeaway. We're going to take it away. We're going to, oh, did that? Oh, here's your phone. It's always the phone, the phone.
Right.
Like when I was a kid, what was it? Oh, go outside, come back at dinner. I don't know. Like what was our punishment? Go sit in the room. We didn't have a phone, like stare at the
Right.
wall, you
Right.
know?
Right.
So it's like this punishment thing. And I feel like, oh, it gets so old, and
Yeah.
but it is this calmness that I realize that I've learned because I've practiced it. I always say, you got to do it till it's like a muscle, right? Like
Yep.
it's as a mom, you're like, okay, that I'm just going to take the phone. It's not necessary. That's probably not working well. And then my Kelly's like, how do you do that? I just get so mad. But I just feel like over time, if you are conscious and have the awareness that what I'm doing is not serving me
Right.
or you, it's just not working.
Right.
Right. And I'm teaching them that.
Yeah, exactly. And you're teaching them such an important lesson, right? Because it's not this, we get focused on, certain things. And it's like, oh, the phone is what's causing this problem, right? And then we teach them to like get really dialed down on this one thing. And really what you're teaching them is, how to behave emotionally, which is so important. And they'll get upset, but then they see you, and it doesn't happen right away, unfortunately, but they have nothing to argue with you about because your behavior is in check, right?
Exactly. That's the
And so,
point.
and it's just like what you said around practicing, right? Because and that's what neuroscience teaches us. It's not, people will say, well, I'm insecure or I'm a rageaholic or whatever. No, no, you've just practiced being that. That's what
Hmm.
you've practiced. You've practiced being insecure. You've practiced being a rageaholic. So just practice something different. Practice being calm. We can have a thought like, I want to do this differently, but it doesn't become a habit until we put it into practice.
Right.
The thought doesn't mean anything until you actually change your behavior, and things change when you change your behavior.
Yes.
So what I advise people to do is, you need that's your priority, right? Like if the kid is on the phone for an hour longer because you had to go do something to get yourself, you had to go meditate or get yourself in an emotional position to be able to deal with this, then that's what has to happen. And that practice, eventually you'll have to do that less and less because as you probably experienced, you don't get as angry,
Right.
right? After a while, it takes 5 minutes,
Right.
or after a while, you just doesn't take any time at all. It's like, hey, I need the phone. You've been on it
Right.
too much.
What was your story um, before I go on? But what was, because we're talking about phones, your story you had a terrible story when you went to the school and listened to a speaker.
Oh, yeah. Well, right. So I went to the school to participate in an assembly for internet safety. And I didn't really know exactly what it was going to be about, but it turned out that it was about sexting. And there was a task force in the county here because sexting at the time, I'm sure they probably fixed this by now, but at the time, a minor sending a picture of herself or a boy sharing a picture of a minor sharing a naked picture of herself is a class 3 felony. And so these kids were at risk of having class 3 felonies on their record, which don't go away. So they're sex offenders their whole life.
Oh, wow.
So this task force was formed to try and avoid this from happening, because if they just went by the letter of the law, you'd have 12-year-olds that were sex offenders and they would never
Wow.
lose that. But they told some really profound stories, and about particularly these two that I remembered, about this one girl who had a boyfriend, and she had sexted him some pictures and they broke up and he posted them. And the police determined that those pictures were probably reposted some 750,000 times.
Oh my
And she went on to have, I think she graduated summa cum laude. She went to a really great college, but she never got a job because every time they Googled her, they found these pictures. And then the more tragic story was of this girl whose boyfriend, they had a mutual friend who was also a boy, and they tricked her into engaging in sexual activity with him while the other one videotaped it on graduation day. They put it up, and when she went home, when she went back to school that day, they had gone out to lunch. And when she went back to school that day, she got a standing ovation in the cafeteria, but she didn't know why. And when she went home that night, she picked up her graduation gown from the dry cleaner. She went home that night, she saw what had happened. And instead of going to graduation, she took her life.
God. Oh,
And when I heard that, and then the kicker was, he said, when I interview these kids, I always ask them the same question. I ask the boys, why did you do this? Why did you pressure her into sending a picture of you? And he said, they always say the same thing. They say, because I want to see a picture of her. And then they ask the girls, well, why did you do this? Why did you give in? Why did you succumb? And the girls always say the same thing. And before he said it, I knew exactly what he was going to say. They say, because I wanted him to love me.
Oh,
That was in 2016.
oh
Now,
my gosh, it was?
that was in 2016. And what happened to me in jail when I realized that I had married because I felt unworthy and all of that stuff, that happened in 2006. It's 10 years later. But when I sat in that auditorium, I was like, I got to write this book because this is
Huh.
still happening.
No
How can
kidding.
this still be happening? I was born in 1970. These girls were born in 2003.
Oh,
How can this still be happening?
oh, that makes me sick. That's more power from what the point I need to get in this world to these kids. Oh,
Right.
and I see these videos that my daughter I'm like, do these kids know, like, social media, it's so new to us. So, it's just like you said, it's just like it came out, Paige was born. I didn't have a cell phone to take a picture of her in the hospital. She's like, where's my pictures when,
Right.
I'm like, we didn't have those.
Right.
Um, she just turned 15 yesterday. And I'm thinking, gosh, the social media thing and all the pressure. And I think, these pictures that go out there, the Snapchats that they think
Oh,
aren't, I mean, it gets into my skin. I think, I mean, of course my kids know that, but when I see the other kids and I'm like, okay, I just want to go over to you and say, do you realize what you have at stake? You
yeah.
have you have high school years, freshman, you have 3 years left now. Do you want to be on the varsity, whatever? Do you want to play this sport? Do you want to go to this college? We're now planning. You could ruin the whole thing. You could
Right.
put it all to bed.
And I tell my older son too. I mean, I've always done that since he was in high school, because I don't have girls, even though I really feel so strongly about this. But I always tell him, look, you don't know what the motivation is. And I'm telling you that a lot of these girls will do whatever you want them to do because they want you to love them. And
Mm,
that's just the sad truth. So you need to think very carefully before you make decisions or moves or anything. And you need to think about what your motives are because they might not be aligned.
right. Oh, I just
And I
goes
think
going
that's,
there.
I really think that's how so much date rape happens and all this kind of stuff, is that women and girls are looking for something that was never promised to begin with. That was never, it's all based on their own unworthiness. And they take those steps toward the wolf, just like Little Red Riding
Yep.
Hood did. I know that was my Me Too story, is the same exact thing, just wanting to be loved.
Mm-hmm.
And we could not to say that it doesn't excuse the behavior of men and boys, but it does say that we could have prevented it ourselves.
Right.
We didn't need to be a victim.
Mm-mm. Oh, so true. As we get to the end, I want to before we say goodbye, I was on your website and you have the videos, the 4 series and I'm only on 2 because they come every other, they come once a day. So
Yeah.
will you go through those? Because I really thought that was interesting too, because I just got my second one, but I listened to the first one. Will you just go through those before we kind of close here?
Geez, if I can remember what they were. Now there was a set of 4 videos that were about
Serenity is an
bust burnout.
emergency.
Okay.
Serenity. I'll tell you because I wrote them.
Okay, so serenity is the only emergency. So that's what I talked about before. So these were my 4 steps to bust burnout, basically, because women get very burned out by being everything to everyone. And so the first step was, and these are just 5-minute videos that are free on my website. And the first one is serenity is the only emergency, and that's what I spoke about before. Like, you may think that the dishes in the sink, or the husband not getting the kids to bed, or the thing that you just screwed up at work, or the person who threw you under the bus, you may think that all of those are the emergency. That's not the emergency. The emergency is your emotional state. Because when we are not coherent in our heart and in our brain, we are not able to make coherent decisions. We can only think equal to the emotion that we're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
think about
love
that. You
that.
can only think equal to the emotion that we're feeling. If you can only think equal to the emotion you're
Wow.
feeling, you are at serious risk for saying things you don't want to say, for doing things. And we all know when you send that email that you never should have sent, right? And you're like, oh my God, then you're up all night anxious. What are they going to say back? And you get to your computer the next day and you're like, oh,
Right.
like, right?
Right.
Like, the serenity is the only emergency. That's the first lesson of those.
And the second one is toxic voice.
Oh yeah. So the toxic voice is that voice in your head, that's always telling you that you're stupid or fat or lazy or you're not good enough or all that kind of stuff. And that is what we really, really have to get a hold of. That toxic voice thrives on your unworthiness. It loves your unworthiness. I have a whole lesson I teach about net worth, self worth, and real worth, because net worth and self worth both fluctuate. Like a net worth fluctuates, right? If the market's up and down.
Right.
Well, self worth is really no different, because our self worth is based on, are we pretty? Are we funny? Are we smart? Are we da da da? And if we don't feel those ways in that day, because our toxic voice has been, just ragging on us, then all of a sudden we might have no self worth. But the truth is, you always have your real worth. You're worthy no matter what. It doesn't matter what you did or said. You're a human being. You're a
Right.
child of God. You have
Yes.
worth.
Oh, I love that. And then the
Let that
third
one.
one, know your motives.
So your motives is what I mentioned before. Like if you're going to, I have a client who, sent me an email once that she was going to send to all these people, well, why are you sending that? Well, because I want them to know, my side of the story, and I want them to know what happened. Well, the motive there turned out to be she wanted validation. So when you send an email, for example, or you talk to your mother who never validated you before and you expect validation, then you put yourself at risk when your goal is validation or appreciation or something like that, because you don't know what someone's going to come back with. So the motive that you're doing something with has to be clean. It can't be that you want validation or you want appreciation, and you have to get really honest with yourself about that, because sometimes as women are like, oh no, this is fine, I really want to do this. Then we do it and we're resentful because someone didn't appreciate that we did it,
Right.
or we're anxious and insecure because someone didn't validate us. So
Your
what's your motive?
expectations or expectations.
Yeah, expectations. Yeah. But even like at a dinner party, you know what? Sometimes I ask myself, like, why did I just say that? Well, I said it because I wanted this person to think I'm funny.
Ah,
That's really not a great motivation. I should
right.
say something because it adds something to the conversation.
Oh, I love that. That's a great awareness. I don't know what number 4 is. I didn't write that down. I didn't get that far. Do you know? I'll have to
Yeah.
wait till like 2 more days and I'll know what 4 is. But I
Yeah.
just,
I remember.
where can we find you? So give us your,
Yeah. So, well, those videos and all about me is on abbyhaverman.com. And then you can always email me at abbyhaverman.com.
perfect. And it'll all be in the show notes. And I am so grateful for this time. You're like my friend.
I
Instant
know
friends. Oh, I just
we're
love it.
spirits. Yeah. Thank you so
Yes.
much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. So much. I can't wait to meet you in person one day.
I know, me too.
Yeah, I'll come to Colorado.
Yeah.
Thank you, Abby.
Great.